Step back, you don't live here anymore. Staff Sergeant Marcus Santos heard these words after 15 months dodging bullets in Afghanistan, blocked from his own front door by strangers paying $2,400.00 a month to live in his home, while he earned $63.00 a day in combat. This was the house he bought with his VA loan after losing his wife Lisa in a tragic car accident, where he raised his fierce daughter Emma alone, a sanctuary meant to welcome him back from war. Aaron Walsh, the HOA president who calls cops on kids selling lemonade, masterminded the theft, sneering, "Your military service doesn't exempt you. But widowed fathers and decorated veterans don't fight alone. What happened next will restore your faith in brotherhood and make you salute." Comment below, what would you do if your home was stolen after serving your country? 15 months earlier, Staff Sergeant Marcus Santos was packing his gear with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this before. At 34, he'd already survived one deployment to Iraq, the one that changed everything when a drunk driver took his wife Lisa while he was overseas. Now he was heading to Afghanistan alone, leaving behind their 16-year-old daughter Emma and a modest 3-bedroom house in Willowbrook Estates that represented everything he'd fought to build. The house wasn't much, vinyl siding, a small front yard, and a mortgage he'd secured with a VA loan, but it was theirs. Every payment represented another step away from the chaos of military housing, another move toward the stability he wanted to give Emma after losing her mother. The morning before deployment, Marcus was checking items off his endless prep list when someone knocked. Through the peephole, he saw Karen Walsh, HOA president and the kind of woman who measured grass height with a ruler. Walsh stood on the porch holding a clipboard like it was a weapon, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the plastic backing. "Marcus, dear," Walsh said, pushing past him into the entryway without invitation, "I have some paperwork that needs your signature before you leave." Marcus's mind was on 1,000 other things. Weapons cleaning, legal documents, making sure Emma had everything she needed to stay with his mother-in-law. The HOA form looked standard enough, dense legal language about property protection services and maintenance oversight during extended absence. "Just a formality," Walsh explained, pointing to a signature line with her Mont Blanc pen. "We'll take excellent care of everything while you're gone. Think of it as a service to our deployed heroes." The scent of Walsh's overpowering perfume, something floral and cloying, filled the small entryway as Marcus signed without reading the fine print. First mistake. What he didn't know was that Karen Walsh saw military families as walking dollar signs with deployment schedules. She'd been HOA president for 8 years, turning a simple homeowners association into her personal kingdom. Single fathers deploying overseas were especially attractive targets. No spouse to ask questions, no one to notice when things went sideways. The moment Marcus's convoy rolled out of Fort Carson, Walsh made her move. She contacted Prestige Property Management, a company that specialized in corporate rentals, and asked very few questions about property ownership verification. "Military family," Walsh explained over the phone. "Single father, deployed indefinitely, possibly won't return, wants the property managed professionally to maintain neighborhood standards." Within 6 weeks, Mike and Jenny Patterson, a young couple who thought they'd found the perfect furnished rental, were moving into Marcus's house. They hung their wedding photos on his walls, slept in his bed, and cooked dinner in the kitchen where he'd taught Emma to make her mother's famous lasagna. Walsh collected every penny of that $2,400 monthly rent through a shell company called Willowbrook Property Solutions, while Marcus earned combat pay and slept in a concrete bunker 7,000 miles away. For 15 months, Marcus sent emails from forward operating bases, dreaming of Emma's graduation party in their backyard and finally installing the basketball hoop he'd promised her before leaving. He had no idea that strangers were making memories in his living room while he was making sure they had the freedom to do it. The first thing Marcus noticed when his truck turned onto Elm Street was the wrong cars in his driveway. A Honda Civic with Colorado plates and a Subaru Outback that definitely didn't belong to anyone he knew. The second thing he noticed was the wind chimes hanging from his front porch, delicate silver tubes that caught the afternoon light and played a melody he'd never heard before. Marcus sat in his truck for a full minute, engine ticking as it cooled, trying to make sense of what felt like stepping into an alternate reality. The lawn was perfectly manicured in a way his had never been. Someone had planted rose bushes along the walkway, and there was a welcome mat at the front door that read, "Home Sweet Home" in cursive script. This was definitely his house. Same address, same oak tree in the front yard, same loose brick in the walkway that he'd been meaning to fix for 3 years. But everything else felt like looking at someone else's life through his windows. He walked up to his own front door and knocked, the sound echoing with an irony that wasn't lost on him. A young woman answered, flour dusting her hands and the warm smell of fresh bread wafting out behind her. "Can I help you?" Jenny Patterson asked, her voice polite but cautious. This is my house," Marcus said, the words feeling surreal even as he spoke them. Jenny's face drained of color. "Oh my God, you're the owner? We were told, Karen Walsh said you probably wouldn't be coming back, that you might have been—" She couldn't finish the sentence. That's when Mike appeared, holding a rental agreement that made Marcus's chest tighten. There was his address in black and white, Karen Walsh's signature as property manager, and a lease dated just 8 weeks after Marcus had deployed to Afghanistan. "We had no idea," Mike said, and something in his voice told Marcus he was telling the truth. "We've been here almost a year. We've built our whole life here. Jenny's pregnant. We set up the nursery upstairs." Pregnant. They were expecting a baby in his house, in what had been Emma's room when she was little. And "Look," Marcus said, his military training helping him stay calm despite the chaos in his head. "This isn't your fault, but I need to figure out what the hell is happening here." He drove straight to the HOA office in the strip mall downtown, his hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to leave marks. The cramped office sat between a nail salon and a tax preparer, with Willowbrook Estates HOA painted on the window in gold letters that were starting to peel. Karen Walsh looked up from her desk with the expression of someone who'd been caught red-handed but was going to bluff her way through anyway. "Marcus! You're back. How was your deployment?" The way she said deployment made it sound like he'd been on vacation. "Karen, there are people living in my house." "Oh, that!" Walsh waved a hand like she was swatting away a mosquito. "I sent you the paperwork. Property maintenance services, remember? We've been maintaining your property beautifully." "By renting it out?" "By ensuring it remained occupied and secure. Vacant homes are magnets for break-ins and vandalism. We were protecting your investment while you were away." The audacity was breathtaking. Walsh sat there in her polyester blazer, surrounded by fake plants and motivational posters, acting like she'd done him a favor by stealing his house. "I want them out, today." Walsh's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the petty tyrant underneath. "That's not how this works, dear. You signed an agreement. We have legal obligations to our tenants now. If you want your house back, you'll need to go through proper legal channels." "Legal channels for my own house?" "Your house that you abandoned for over a year, yes." The word abandoned hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been serving his country, not abandoning anything. But arguing with Karen Walsh was like trying to reason with a brick wall that sent violation notices. "I'll be speaking with a lawyer," Marcus said. "You do that, dear. You'll find everything was done completely legally." That first night, Marcus slept in his truck parked outside his own house. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd slept in worse places overseas, but somehow this felt different. This felt like defeat on home soil. He could see the warm glow of lights in his living room windows, could hear the faint sound of the TV he'd bought with his first deployment bonus. The Pattersons were probably watching Netflix on his couch, completely unaware that the man who owned their home was sleeping 50 feet away in a Ford F-150. Emma called around midnight. "Dad, just come stay with Grandma until this gets sorted out. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Princess, this is our home. I'm not running from it." But lying there in the truck bed, looking up at stars he'd dreamed about while sleeping under Afghan skies, Marcus wondered if stubbornness was just another word for stupidity. The lawyer's office smelled like old coffee and crushed dreams. Marcus sat across from attorney David Chen in a chair that had seen better decades, watching the man study the HOA agreement through reading glasses held together with electrical tape. The $500 0 cents consultation fee had come from money Marcus had been saving to take Emma on a college visit trip. "Mr. Santos," Chen said, sighing like a man who'd delivered bad news too many times. "Technically speaking, they may have covered their legal bases." Technically? The language here is deliberately vague. Property protection services could be interpreted to include occupancy management. And look here, he pointed to a clause Marcus had never seen before. "This addendum was filed after you deployed." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike. "They modified the contract after I left?" "It appears so. The problem is proving you never received notice of the modification. That's going to be difficult to verify from a forward operating base in Afghanistan." Chen explained that while the Service Members Civil Relief Act offered some protections, the HOA had threaded the legal needle just enough to make a court battle expensive and uncertain. "What are my options?" "Sue them. It'll cost about $15,000, take 8 months, and you might win." Maybe. Marcus left the lawyer's office feeling like he'd been gut-punched. $15,000 he didn't have, 8 months he couldn't wait, and a maybe that felt more like probably not. His next move was the neighbors. Surely someone would have noticed strangers moving into his house while he was deployed. Surely someone would care that a soldier was being screwed over by their own HOA. Mrs. Chen next door answered her doorbell wearing the expression of someone who'd been dreading this conversation. "Marcus, honey, I wanted to call you, but Karen said it was all legal and proper." "Did you see them move in?" "Oh yes, big U-Haul and everything. I asked Karen about it and she said you'd decided to rent the place out for extra income while deployed. Made sense to me, actually. Smart financial planning." Mr. Rodriguez across the street was washing his car with the focused intensity of a man avoiding eye contact. "I got my own battles with the HOA, Marcus. Can't afford to rock the boat." The Hendersons next door suddenly found their garage fascinating when Marcus approached. The Williamses down the block were just heading out, despite clearly being in their bathrobes at 3 p.m. Only one neighbor showed any backbone, Tom Mitchell, a grizzled Vietnam vet who lived at the end of the block. He shuffled over with a thermos of coffee and a folding chair that looked like it had survived multiple deployments itself. "Goddamn disgrace," Tom muttered, setting up his chair beside Marcus's truck. "Man serves his country, comes home to this horse shit." "Did you know what was happening?" "Suspected something was off, but Karen Walsh told everyone you'd given permission, said you were making good money off the rental." Tom spit into the grass. "Shoulda known better. That woman wouldn't tell the truth if her life depended on it." That evening, Marcus made his first strategic counterattack. He posted his story on Facebook, Instagram, and the local community Reddit page. The response was immediate and overwhelming, like calling in close air support and watching the cavalry arrive in real time. Within hours, his post had been shared hundreds of times. Comments poured in from fellow veterans, neighbors, and complete strangers who were outraged by his story. Local news reporter Sarah Kim called within 2 hours. "Mr. Santos, I'm with Channel 7 News. Would you be willing to do an interview about what's happened to you?" The next day, Sarah Kim and her cameraman met Marcus in front of his house. It felt surreal, being interviewed about his own home like it was a crime scene. "How does it feel to come home from serving your country to find strangers living in your house?" Sarah asked. "It feels like betrayal," Marcus said simply. "Not by the people living there, they're victims too, but by the system that was supposed to protect military families while we're overseas." When Sarah contacted the HOA for comment, Karen Walsh threatened to sue the news station for harassment and defamation. That threat made it into the story, and suddenly, veteran betrayal was trending in their city. The story aired on the evening news, and Marcus's phone didn't stop ringing. Veterans from 3 states called to offer support. A GoFundMe appeared without his knowledge and raised $4,000, 0 cents in the first day. But Karen Walsh wasn't backing down. If anything, the media attention seemed to make her more determined to prove she was right, like a dictator doubling down when the revolution starts. Marcus was about to learn that sometimes the system fails you so completely that you have to build your own. Marcus woke up in his truck to find his windshield covered in shaving cream, spelling out "Homeless Vet" in giant letters. The small American flag he'd planted beside his makeshift campsite had been torn down and trampled into the mud. His camp chair, the one Tom Mitchell had given him, was hanging from the oak tree like some twisted decoration. The message was clear. Walsh wanted him gone, and she didn't care how low she had to go to make it happen. Marcus photographed everything with the methodical precision he'd learned in the Army. Timestamps, angles, evidence. If they wanted to escalate, he'd document every step of their war against him. That's when Tom Mitchell shuffled over with his morning coffee and a grim expression that spoke of too many battles fought and lost. "Saw who did it," he said quietly. "Dark sedan, around 3 a.m. Couldn't make out the plates, but it had one of them HOA parking stickers in the window. You think Walsh did this personally? Don't matter who held the shaving cream. She gave the order." Within an hour, Marcus received 3 violation notices stuffed in his truck's door handle. Unauthorized camping equipment, $50 0 daily fine. Extended vehicle parking, $25 0 daily fine. And disruption of community aesthetic, $100 0 daily fine. The math was simple and brutal. $175 0 per day for sleeping outside his own house. Your military service doesn't exempt you from community standards, the final notice read, signed with Karen Walsh's flowing signature that looked like it belonged on a death warrant. That afternoon, Marcus made a phone call that would change everything. "Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, this is Santos." "Santos, heard you were back stateside. How's civilian life treating you?" "Like a kick in the teeth, Sergeant. I need backup." Dave Rodriguez had been Marcus's squad leader in Afghanistan, the kind of NCO who'd walk through hell barefoot to bring his people home. He listened without interruption as Marcus explained his situation, and Marcus could practically hear the man's blood pressure rising through the phone. "So let me get this straight," Dave said when Marcus finished. "Some HOA Karen stole your house while you were downrange, and now she's charging you money to sleep in your own driveway? That's about the size of it. Pack light, Santos. I'm driving down tonight with some friends who'd like to meet this lady." Dave arrived at 200 hours in a pickup truck loaded with camping equipment and 3 other veterans who looked like they'd been personally insulted by Marcus's story. They set up a proper perimeter on the public sidewalk, complete with folding tables, camp chairs, and a coffee station that would have made any forward operating base proud. 4-man watch rotation, Dave announced with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "No way they're vandalizing our position again." By sunrise, their sidewalk camp had the organized efficiency of a military outpost. Dave had brought discipline and structure to what had been Marcus's solo protest. Passers-by started stopping to ask questions, and the story spread further through the community like ripples in a pond. Walsh's response was swift and predictable. She called an emergency HOA board meeting for that evening, sending notices to all residents with the subject line, "Security Alert," addressing the military occupation of our neighborhood. Military occupation, as if 4 veterans camping legally on public property constituted an invasion force. Marcus and his team attended the meeting, sitting quietly in the back of the community center while Walsh addressed a dozen residents who'd bothered to show up on a weeknight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation that threatens the safety and property values of our community," Walsh began, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation that looked like it had been designed during the Clinton administration. "Unauthorized individuals are establishing what amounts to a vagrant encampment on our streets." "Vagrant encampment?" Tom Mitchell stood up, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd actually seen combat. "Those are American veterans exercising their constitutional rights on public property." "Mitchell, please limit your comments to the designated public comment period." "I'll comment when I damn well please, Karen. These men served their country while you were here collecting HOA fees and measuring people's grass with a ruler." The room erupted in scattered applause and uncomfortable murmurs. Walsh pounded her gavel like she was trying to drive a railroad spike. "Order. We will have order." That's when Dave stood up. At 6'4", with the bearing of a career soldier, he commanded attention without saying a word. The room fell silent, as if someone had pulled the plug on a radio. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we're not here to cause trouble. We're here to support a fellow veteran who's been wronged by this organization. Everything we're doing is legal, peaceful, and protected by the First Amendment. You're intimidating residents." "No, ma'am, we're exercising our rights. Same rights we swore an oath to defend, same rights that allow you to hold this meeting without fear of government interference." The board voted 4-1 to explore legal options for removing the encampment. The one dissenting vote came from board member Janet Morris, whose son had served 2 tours in Iraq. "I'm ashamed of this board," Janet said before walking out in disgust. Walking back to their campsite that night, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since returning from deployment. Hope. Not because the situation was improving, if anything it was getting worse, but because he wasn't facing it alone anymore. "What's our next move, Sergeant?" he asked Dave. "We call in the cavalry, Santos. Time to see how many people actually give a damn about supporting the troops beyond bumper sticker slogans." The taste of impending victory was as sweet as the coffee they'd be brewing at 500. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Linda Patterson, the county clerk who'd served as a Navy yeoman in the Gulf War. She'd stayed late one Tuesday evening to help Marcus research the property records, spreading documents across the courthouse table like intelligence reports before a mission briefing. "Here's your original HOA agreement," Linda said, pointing to a document dated just before Marcus's deployment. "And here's what they filed with the county 6 months ago." Marcus stared at the papers side by side. They looked identical at first glance, but Linda's trained eye had caught the differences that would change everything. Look at Section 4.2 in the original. Property maintenance services shall include lawn care, exterior upkeep, and security monitoring. Now look at the amended version. Property maintenance services shall include occupancy management, rental oversight, and extended property utilization. The language was bureaucratic bullshit designed to confuse, but the meaning was crystal clear. They'd rewritten his contract after he'd deployed, changing basic maintenance into full rental authority. "Is that legal?" "Hell no," Linda said, then caught herself. "Sorry, Marcus, I mean absolutely not. Any modification to a homeowner agreement requires written consent and proper notification. They can't just change your contract because you're deployed. That's exactly what the Service Members Civil Relief Act was designed to prevent." Marcus felt like he'd been holding his breath for months and could finally exhale. "So, I have a case?" "Honey, you have more than a case. You have them dead to rights. This is textbook fraud." Linda made copies of everything, then pulled out another file that made Marcus's eyes widen. "There's more. Your property is still covered under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Any rental agreement made without your explicit consent while you were deployed is automatically void. Those people living in your house, they're technically trespassing, and the HOA is facilitating it." The legal terminology was complicated, but the bottom line hit Marcus like a perfect headshot. Walsh had committed federal crimes, and he could prove it. "What do I do with this?" "First, you call JAG, Judge Advocate General's office at Fort Carson. Military lawyers love cases like this because they're slam dunks. Second, you file a complaint with the State Attorney General's office. Third, you might want to consider that the HOA owes you about $36,000 in rental income they collected illegally. $36,000. Marcus's head spun. That was enough to pay for Emma's first year of college, money that had been stolen from him while he was earning combat pay overseas. "There's a knowledge nugget for you," Linda said with a grin. "Always keep copies of every document you sign, especially if you're military. Scammers count on service members being too busy or too trusting to read the fine print. Takeaway: document everything and never sign anything without keeping copies. Your future self will thank you." That evening, Marcus called Emma with the news. "Dad, are you telling me they illegally stole our house and made money off it?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you, princess. And now you can prove it in court?" With documentation that would make a drill sergeant weep with pride. Emma was quiet for a moment. "Mom would be so proud of how you're handling this. You know that, right?" Elisa had always said that the best battles are won with brains, not bullets. Marcus was about to prove her right. He also called Dave with the update. The response was immediate and decisive. "Santos, time to call in the big guns. How do you feel about turning this into a proper military operation? What did you have in mind?" "I'm thinking we show this community what it really looks like when veterans stand together. You ready to see how deep this rabbit hole goes?" Marcus looked at his house, where strangers were watching his TV and sleeping in his bed, while the woman who'd orchestrated the whole scheme faced zero consequences. "Make the calls, Sergeant. Let's finish this fight." Master Sergeant Johnson, retired, arrived Thursday morning in a Ram 2500 with Illinois plates and the bearing of a man who'd spent 30 years teaching soldiers how to solve impossible problems efficiently. Behind him came Staff Sergeant Williams from Missouri, Corporal Martinez from Kansas, and Sergeant First Class Thompson from right there in Colorado Springs. Marcus's little sidewalk protest had become a command center. "Situation report," Johnson said, settling into the camp chair Dave offered him with the gravity of someone receiving a mission briefing. Marcus briefed them on the legal discoveries, Walsh's escalating harassment, and the HOA board's attempts to silence them. Johnson listened with the focused attention of someone who'd spent decades turning chaos into victory. "So we've got fraud, theft, civil rights violations, and harassment of military personnel," he summarized, ticking items off on his fingers. "Outstanding. I love a target-rich environment." The veterans spread county maps and HOA documents across Tom Mitchell's kitchen table, analyzing the situation with military precision. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sound of rustling papers as they dissected Walsh's operation piece by piece. Williams, who'd worked in military intelligence, found patterns in the HOA's financial records that suggested Marcus wasn't their first victim. "Look at this," Williams said, pointing to a spreadsheet he'd obtained through public records requests. 3 other military families had property maintenance agreements filed while they were deployed. Same company, same rental rates, same bullshit legal language. Martinez, who'd become a paralegal after leaving the Army, researched Colorado HOA law and discovered that Willowbrook Estates HOA had been operating without proper state registration for 2 years. Every fine they'd issued, every rule they'd enforced was legally questionable. "They're not just thieves," Martinez said, highlighting sections of state law with a yellow marker. "They're incompetent thieves who've been breaking the law for years." Thompson handled logistics, coordinating the arrival of more veterans and organizing their public demonstration. The plan was simple but effective. Overwhelm Walsh's intimidation tactics with discipline, organization, and unassailable legal authority. "We're not here to cause trouble," Johnson explained to the assembled group as evening shadows stretched across their camp. "We're here to support a fellow veteran and demonstrate what service really means. Everyone maintains military bearing at all times. We follow all laws, respect all people, and let our actions speak louder than their bullshit." By Friday evening, 12 veterans had arrived from 4 states, turning the sidewalk into a model of military efficiency. They set up organized stations along the public right-of-ways, information tables explaining Marcus's situation, American flags marking their perimeter, and a coffee station that drew curious neighbors like a magnet. The visual was powerful. Disciplined military personnel conducting themselves with honor, while the HOA president hid behind lawyers and increasingly desperate threats. Sarah Kim from Channel 7 returned with a full news crew, and this time she brought backup from the network affiliate in Denver. The story was going statewide, and the optics were perfect. "Mr. Santos, how does it feel to have this support from your fellow veterans?" "It feels like family," Marcus said simply, his voice carrying the weight of shared experience. "In the military, we don't leave people behind. That doesn't stop when you take off the uniform." Johnson stepped up to the microphone with the authority of someone used to speaking for others. "We're here because Marcus Santos represents every military family who's been taken advantage of while serving overseas. This isn't just about one house or one HOA. This is about whether America keeps its promises to the people who defend it." The interview aired Friday night, and by Saturday morning their story had been picked up by Fox News, CNN, and military blogs across the internet. Veterans Stand Together was trending nationally, with thousands of comments from service members sharing their own HOA horror stories. Walsh's response was predictable and tone-deaf. She hired prestige security services to monitor what she called the threatening military presence in their neighborhood. 3 uniformed guards and a white SUV began circling the block every hour, like sharks sensing blood in the water. "Private security," Dave laughed, the sound carrying across their camp. "She's bringing rent-a-cops to intimidate combat veterans? That's like bringing a water gun to a tank fight." But Marcus knew Walsh wasn't done escalating. People like her never backed down when challenged. They doubled down until they either destroyed everyone around them or destroyed themselves trying. "What's our next move?" he asked Johnson as they watched the security SUV make another pointless lap. "We wait for her to overplay her hand," the master sergeant said, sipping coffee that could have stripped paint. "And trust me, Santos, she will. People like her always do. They can't help themselves." Knowledge nugget: when dealing with bureaucratic bullies, document everything and build a network of support. Bullies rely on isolating their victims. Take away the isolation, and you take away their power. Takeaway: community support and proper documentation can turn the tables on even the most entrenched power structures. Karen Walsh's nuclear option came Monday morning in the form of an emergency petition to the county court, requesting a restraining order against what she termed an organized military occupation threatening community safety and property values. The petition, all 17 pages of bureaucratic hysteria, painted a picture of intimidation and harassment that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so desperately pathetic. Walsh claimed the veterans were conducting paramilitary operations, intimidating residents with aggressive displays of nationalism, and creating a public health hazard through unsanitary camping conditions. Judge Patricia Morrison, a no-nonsense woman who'd seen every variety of legal bullshit in her 23 years on the bench, read the petition with the expression of someone examining a particularly offensive piece of garbage. "Ms. Walsh," Judge Morrison said during the emergency hearing, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, "you're asking me to issue a restraining order against American veterans who are peacefully exercising their First Amendment rights on public property? Your Honor, they're creating a security concern for our families." "Have they threatened anyone?" "Well, no, but their presence." "Have they violated any laws?" "Not exactly, but the implications." "Have they damaged any property or engaged in any illegal activities?" Walsh's lawyer, a nervous-looking man who clearly wished he was handling a simple divorce case, shuffled through his papers like he was looking for a miracle. "Your Honor, my client believes that their presence creates an atmosphere of intimidation that violates the peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood." "Believes?" Judge Morrison leaned forward, her reading glasses catching the courtroom lights. "Counselor, I deal in facts, not feelings. Do you have any evidence of actual wrongdoing, or am I wasting taxpayer money on someone's hurt feelings?" The answer was no, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Judge Morrison denied the restraining order request and strongly suggested that Walsh find more productive ways to resolve community disputes than wasting the court's time. But if Marcus thought that judicial smackdown would end things, he'd underestimated how far a cornered narcissist would go to protect their crumbling empire. That afternoon, Walsh called Sheriff Tom Bradley directly, claiming there was an armed encampment of military extremists threatening innocent families. She demanded immediate law enforcement intervention to protect the community from potential domestic terrorism. Sheriff Bradley, a Vietnam veteran who'd been following the story in the news with growing disgust, decided to see for himself what kind of armed extremist camp had Walsh so terrified. He arrived at the sidewalk camp in full uniform, ready for anything from a hostage situation to a militia standoff. What he found was a dozen veterans, sitting in folding chairs, reading paperback novels, and brewing coffee on a camping stove that smelled like heaven. Johnson stood when the sheriff approached, extending his hand in greeting with the respect one veteran shows another. "Sheriff Bradley? Master Sergeant Johnson, retired. We've been expecting you." "Expecting me?" "Yes, sir. We figured Ms. Walsh would escalate to law enforcement eventually. Standard playbook for people who can't win on the merits." Bradley looked around the organized campsite, noting the carefully folded American flags, the neat arrangement of camping equipment, and the respectful demeanor of every person present. The contrast between Walsh's hysterical description and the reality before him was jarring. "I've got to ask, any weapons here?" "Just our DD-214S, sir," Johnson said with a perfectly straight face, referring to military discharge papers. Though those seemed to be scaring Ms. Walsh pretty effectively. Bradley couldn't help but smile. "Mind if I take a look around?" "Not at all, Sheriff. We've got nothing to hide." The sheriff spent 20 minutes examining their setup, talking with the veterans, and reviewing the legal documents Marcus had compiled. By the end, He was shaking his head in disgust at what had been done to a deployed soldier. "Mr. Santos," he said, his voice carrying the weight of shared military experience, "I want you to know that what happened to you is a disgrace. Any public official who would steal from a deployed soldier ought to be run out of town on a rail." Then Sheriff Bradley did something that made Karen Walsh's worst nightmare come true. He publicly chose a side. "I'll be posting a deputy here periodically," he announced to the news cameras that had materialized like magic. "Not to monitor these veterans, but to ensure their constitutional rights are protected while they seek justice through proper legal channels." The visual of a county sheriff shaking hands with veterans and posing for photos beside their American flags made the evening news across 3 states. Walsh's credibility, already hanging by a thread, snapped completely under the weight of public scrutiny. But the humiliation of losing in court and having law enforcement side against her only made Walsh more dangerous. Cornered animals fight dirtiest when they have nothing left to lose. That night, she made a decision that would finally give Marcus everything he needed to end this fight once and for all. Walsh's final gambit was as desperate as it was legally absurd. She called an emergency HOA board meeting for Thursday evening, claiming the continued presence of veterans on public property violated the community's peace and safety standards, and demanding the board invoke emergency powers to ban public gatherings within a half-mile radius of any HOA property. The legal impossibility of trying to ban constitutionally protected activity on public property would have been laughable, except that Walsh seemed to genuinely believe she had the authority to override the First Amendment with an HOA vote. "We need to take decisive action to protect our property values and community standards," she announced to the 4 remaining board members. 3 others had resigned rather than be associated with her increasingly unhinged behavior, and 2 more had been voted out in emergency elections. Board member Janet Morris, whose son had served in Iraq, stared at Walsh like she'd completely lost her mind. "Karen, you can't ban people from public sidewalks. That's not how laws work in America." "I can if they're threatening our community with their illegal occupation." "They're not threatening anyone. They're sitting in folding chairs, drinking coffee, and reading Tom Clancy novels." The meeting devolved into shouting, with Walsh demanding loyalty from board members who were increasingly horrified by her behavior. When the smoke cleared, the board had voted 3-1 to censure Walsh and recommended she resign immediately for conduct detrimental to the community. Walsh's response was to storm out of the meeting, screaming that she'd sue every last one of you cowards for failing to support HOA authority in the face of military intimidation. But her real meltdown came the next morning, when she marched down to the veterans' sidewalk camp with a camera crew she'd hired to document what she called the illegal occupation of our peaceful neighborhood. What happened next was captured on video and would be viewed by millions of people within 48 hours. "You people need to leave immediately," Walsh shouted at Johnson, who was reading a Stephen King novel in his folding chair. "This is harassment, and I won't stand for it another minute." "Ma'am," Johnson said calmly, not looking up from his book, "we're on public property, exercising our constitutional rights. You're welcome to call the police if you believe we're breaking any laws." "I don't need to call the police. I have the authority to remove trespassers from HOA-controlled areas." "Ma'am, this is a public sidewalk. The HOA has no authority here whatsoever." That's when Walsh lost whatever remained of her composure, her voice rising to a pitch that could have shattered glass. "You think your military service gives you special rights? You think you can just show up and intimidate law-abiding citizens because you wore a uniform?" Marcus, who'd been quietly organizing his legal documents at the camp table, finally looked up. The sound of paper rustling stopped as every veteran in the camp turned their attention to the unfolding confrontation. "And Ms. Walsh, nobody here is trying to intimidate anyone. We're just seeking justice through legal means." "Justice? You abandoned your property for over a year. You think you can just waltz back and demand special treatment?" "I didn't abandon anything. I was serving my country in Afghanistan." Walsh's face turned red as a stop sign, and she stepped closer to Marcus with her finger pointed like a weapon. "Your so-called service doesn't make you better than the rest of us. You signed a contract, and now you're trying to weasel out of it because you put on a uniform and got yourself deployed." The silence that followed was deafening. Every veteran in the camp had gone completely still, watching Walsh dig her own grave deeper with every word that spilled from her mouth. Johnson slowly closed his book and stood up. At 6'6" with 30 years of military bearing, he was an imposing figure even in civilian clothes. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd led men in combat, "I think you should step back and reconsider what you just said." But Walsh was beyond reason, beyond self-preservation, beyond any semblance of human decency. "Are you threatening me? Are you actually threatening a civilian? I'll have you arrested for assault." "No, ma'am. I'm giving you an opportunity to apologize to a widowed father who lost his wife while serving this country, then came home from his own deployment to find his house stolen by someone who's never served anything but her own interests." The camera Walsh had brought to document her righteousness captured every second of her meltdown, including her final words before storming away. "I don't care what uniform any of you wore. This is my neighborhood, and I make the rules here. Your service means nothing to decent people." The video went viral within hours. Karen vs. Veterans trended on Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook like wildfire. News outlets across the country picked up the story, and suddenly everyone in America knew about Karen Walsh, the HOA president who'd told combat veterans that their service meant nothing. The backlash was swift and brutal. Walsh's real estate business was flooded with thousands of negative reviews. The HOA's property management company terminated their contract immediately. 3 more board members resigned, leaving Walsh effectively powerless and completely isolated. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with public humiliation. He wanted justice, and he was about to get it in the most satisfying way possible. Knowledge nugget: when someone shows you who they really are, believe them, and make sure everyone else sees it too. Takeaway: sometimes the best strategy is to give your opponent enough rope to hang themselves with. The final confrontation came on a Tuesday evening that would go down in Willowbrook Estates history as the night Karen Walsh learned what happens when you declare war on the wrong veteran. The community center was packed beyond fire code capacity. Every resident of the subdivision had shown up, along with news crews from 6 different stations, a documentary filmmaker who'd driven in from California, and approximately 70 veterans who'd come to witness justice being served with military precision. Walsh sat at the board table looking like she'd aged 20 years in the past 2 weeks. Her carefully maintained facade had cracked completely, revealing the petty tyrant underneath. The remaining board members, Janet Morris and 2 newcomers who'd been elected in emergency votes, sat as far from her as the table would allow. Marcus entered wearing his dress uniform, every ribbon and medal polished to mirror brightness. He carried a briefing folder that contained everything: the forged contracts, the financial records, the legal opinions, and a stack of evidence that would have made a prosecutor weep tears of joy. The smell of nervous sweat and anticipation filled the room as Marcus approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd briefed generals under fire, "I'm here tonight to present the facts about what happened to my family while I was deployed overseas serving this country." He started with the timeline, methodically walking through each step of Walsh's scheme like a prosecutor laying out a murder case. The illegal contract modifications, the unauthorized rental, the theft of $36,000 in rental income, the harassment and intimidation when Marcus tried to reclaim his own property. According to Colorado Revised Statutes Title 38, Article 33.3, Marcus continued, holding up documents like evidence in a courtroom, any modification to a homeowner agreement requires written notification and a 30-day response period. Ms. Walsh made these changes 6 weeks after I deployed, with no notification to me or my family. He pulled out more papers, each one another nail in Walsh's coffin. Furthermore, under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, any rental agreement concerning a service member's primary residence made without their explicit consent while deployed is null and void. Walsh tried to interrupt, her voice cracking. "That's not how—" "Ma'am, I'm not finished." Marcus's command voice cut through the room like a blade through butter. "You'll have your opportunity to respond when I'm done presenting the facts." The crowd fell silent. Even the crying babies seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Marcus pulled out his phone and connected it to the community center's audio system. "I'd like to play a recording from last Friday, when Ms. Walsh visited our peaceful demonstration." Walsh's own voice filled the room, amplified for everyone to hear. Your so-called service doesn't make you better than the rest of us. You signed a contract, and now you're trying to weasel out of it because you put on a uniform and got yourself deployed. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disgust and several people shaking their heads in disbelief. Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who'd been too afraid to speak up before, stood and pointed at Walsh with a trembling finger. Shame on you, Karen Walsh. Shame on you for what you said to this man. Others joined in, and suddenly the room erupted in a chorus of disapproval that had been building for weeks. Walsh sat frozen in her chair, finally understanding that she'd lost not just the battle, but any pretense of community support. When the noise died down, Marcus delivered his final blow with the precision of a sniper taking out a target. Mrs. Walsh, you stole my house while I was serving my country. You pocketed $36,000 that belonged to my family. You tried to intimidate me, harass me, and silence me when I sought justice. But here's what you didn't count on. He gestured to the veterans filling every available seat and lining the walls. You didn't count on the fact that soldiers don't abandon each other. You didn't count on the fact that service members understand honor in ways you never will. And you didn't count on the fact that Americans still believe in doing what's right. Marcus reached into his folder and pulled out one final document, holding it up like a battle flag. This morning, the Colorado Attorney General's office filed criminal charges against you for fraud, theft, and violations of the Colorado Consumer Protection Act. The FBI has opened an investigation into potential federal crimes related to defrauding military personnel, and the IRS is very interested in the $36,000 in unreported rental income you've been hiding from federal taxation. The room erupted like a volcano. Camera flashes went off like strobe lights at a concert. Walsh's face went white, then green, then settled on a sickly yellow that matched her polyester blazer. But Marcus wasn't done delivering justice. The emergency board meeting you called tonight? That was actually perfect timing, because according to the HOA's own bylaws, board members can be removed for cause by a simple majority vote of residents present at any official meeting. He looked around the packed room, making eye contact with neighbors who'd watched this drama unfold, all in favor of removing Karen Walsh from the HOA board and banning her from any future leadership roles in this community. The response was overwhelming. Hands shot up across the room like a forest of righteousness growing toward the light. The vote wasn't even close. It was a landslide of epic proportions that would be talked about for years. Janet Morris, now the senior board member, made it official with obvious satisfaction. By a vote of approximately 127-1, Karen Walsh is hereby removed from all positions within the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, effective immediately. Walsh stood up on shaky legs, her empire of petty power crumbling around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. You can't do this to me. I built this community. I protected your property values. Ma'am, Marcus interrupted one final time, his voice carrying the weight of military authority and moral righteousness. You're welcome to appeal this decision. I believe the contact information for the Colorado Attorney General's office is in your recent mail. As Walsh stumbled toward the exit, trailing behind her the scattered remnants of her authority like debris from a crashed airplane, Marcus delivered the mic drop moment that would be quoted in news stories for years to come. Ms. Walsh, you said my service doesn't make me better than anyone else. You're right about that. But it did teach me the difference between serving others and serving yourself. Maybe you should spend some time thinking about which one you've been doing all these years. The standing ovation lasted for 4 full minutes and could be heard 3 blocks away. 4 months later, Marcus Santos finally got to sleep in his own bed again. The legal aftermath moved with surprising speed once the media attention made Walsh's crimes impossible to ignore or sweep under bureaucratic rugs. The Pattersons, who'd been innocent victims of Walsh's elaborate scheme, were relocated to another property with all moving expenses and security deposits paid by the HOA's insurance company. Walsh herself faced charges in both state and federal court, with her trial scheduled for the following spring. More importantly, Marcus's case had exposed a broader pattern of HOA abuse, targeting military families across Colorado. The state legislature passed the Santos Act in record time, strengthening protections for deployed service members, and requiring all HOA boards to undergo mandatory training on military family rights. But the real victory wasn't legal. It was deeply personal. On a crisp Saturday in November, the Willowbrook Estates community held its first annual Veterans Appreciation BBQ in Marcus's backyard. Tom Mitchell manned the grill with the precision of a man who'd cooked for mess halls from Vietnam to Desert Storm. Mrs. Chen brought enough homemade pierogies to feed a small army. The Rodriguez family contributed 3 cases of beer and hired a mariachi band that played patriotic songs with surprising skill. Master Sergeant Johnson had driven down from Denver with his grandkids, who spent the afternoon playing catch with Emma while the adults shared war stories and competed to tell the worst dad jokes. Sheriff Bradley stopped by in his patrol car, officially to check on community safety but actually to grab a burger and argue football stats with Dave Rodriguez. The memorial corner Marcus had created for Lisa had been expanded into a proper garden with a stone bench where he could sit and tell her about his day. Emma had planted roses around the border, Lisa's favorite flower, and they bloomed in shades of red and white, creating a living tribute to love that transcends loss. "Mom would have been proud of how you handled everything, Dad," Emma said, settling beside her father on the bench as the party continued around them with the warm buzz of genuine community. "She would have been proud of how we both handled it, Princess. The way you supported me without losing faith in doing what's right." Marcus watched Johnson teaching a group of neighborhood kids how to properly fold an American flag, while their parents looked on with the kind of respect that can't be manufactured, demanded, or bought, only earned through service and sacrifice. "You know what the best part is?" Marcus asked, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "What's that?" "We're not just getting our house back. We're getting our community back, better than it was before." The new HOA board, led by Janet Morris and including 3 veterans, had implemented policies that prioritized community building over rule enforcement. They had eliminated most of the petty fines that had made life miserable for residents, established a fund to help military families during deployments, and created a neighborhood watch program that actually watched out for neighbors instead of spying on them. Property values, contrary to Walsh's dire predictions about military occupation, had actually increased as word spread about Willowbrook Estates' transformation from HOA hell to military-friendly community. As the sun set behind the Rockies, painting the sky in colors that would have made the flag manufacturers proud, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months: complete peace. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Kim at Channel 7. "Marcus, we're doing a follow-up story on HOA reform legislation. Any interest in sharing your thoughts on how the Santos Act is working?" Marcus typed back, "Always happy to help fellow veterans and protect military families, but these days I'm more interested in grilling burgers than grilling HOA presidents." The response came immediately. "That's exactly why people love your story. You won by staying true to who you are." That evening, after the last guest had gone home and the yard was cleaned up, Marcus sat on his front porch with a cup of coffee and his laptop. He'd been getting messages from military families across the country dealing with their own HOA nightmares, and he'd started a blog to share resources and advice. Tonight's post was titled, "How to Fight Back When the System Fails You, A Veteran's Guide to HOA Justice." He wrote, 8 months ago, I came home from deployment to find strangers living in my house and an HOA president who thought my military service was a character flaw rather than an honor. Tonight, I'm writing this from my own kitchen table, in my own house, surrounded by a community that understands what service really means. Here's what I learned. Sometimes the system fails so completely that you have to build your own. Sometimes justice delayed isn't justice denied, it's justice with proper backup. And sometimes, the best way to honor your oath to defend the Constitution is to actually use the rights it guarantees. If you're a military family dealing with HOA abuse, know this: you are not alone. There are resources available, laws that protect you, and veterans who will stand with you when the fight gets tough. Don't let anyone tell you that your service doesn't matter. It matters more than you know. You matter. And there are people who will fight alongside you to prove it. Drop your HOA horror stories in the comments below. Share this post if you believe America should keep its promises to the people who defend it. And remember, we don't leave anyone behind, even in suburbia. The blog post was shared 15,000 times in the first hour. Marcus closed the laptop and walked out to his backyard, where the American flag he'd hung on his first night back from deployment still flew beneath the stars. Tomorrow, he'd wake up in his own bed, in his own house, in a community that had learned the difference between authority and leadership. But tonight, he just stood there, listening to the wind chimes that had finally returned to their rightful place, playing their gentle music for the man who'd never stopped fighting to come home. Emma appeared beside him, wrapping an arm around her father's shoulders in a gesture that reminded him so much of her mother, it took his breath away. So, what's next for the famous Marcus Santos? Nothing famous about it, princess, just a soldier who came home and refused to give up. And? Marcus smiled, feeling Lisa's presence in the evening breeze and the warmth of community surrounding them both. And maybe that's enough.